As an atheist, I always do my best to be a good Christian. Now, for some people, that may be a stretch of an idea to wrap their head around. And I must admit that when I think about it, it gives me a bit of a chuckle. Nonetheless, the sentiment comes from the heart, and to be even more pointed, it makes total and complete sense to me. I'll do my best to explain this, knowing that just like Christians, I'm destined to fall short. To start, I want to make some observations about my fellows in the Skeptic community. Like most of them, I take serious issue with the imposition of religion on people in a culture that allows its free practice and expression. Blue laws, like the ones I grew up with in Texas, prohibiting free trade and the sale of alcohol on Sundays, were always unnecessary intrusions into private life. This always struck me as theocracy light. And truth tell, I never saw a theocracy that I didn't view as an inherent evil. I've never seen a theocratic government that did not also demonstrate all the telltale signs of oppressive rule. Religious freedom is one thing. Religious governance is something else entirely. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that one out. To this end, a robust and active skeptic community is an important part of any free society. The problem I see with it is that skepticism, like religion, is a human activity, and when humans are active on something, they frequently find a way to screw it up. In the online world, the wild west of intellectual discourse, skeptics have done little more than turn their philosophy into an intellectual bloodsport, relying largely on mockery of religion and religious people who they can't convert to their way of thinking, rather than practicing the tolerance they are so fond of crowing about to anyone who will listen. I'd lay money on the idea of that being the main reason that the skeptic community was so easily overtaken and run into the ground by feminist ideologues. Of course, when I say feminist ideologues, I am talking about people who practice nothing less than the mindless, insulated zealotry of the most dogmatically religious people. Karen Strawn spoke to this in a particularly compelling moment in the Red Pill movie, speaking simply and accurately of feminism. "It's the way," she said, summarizing feminist rhetoric. "It sounds like religion." She was right, of course, and this religion is what co-opted the supposedly skeptic community. Anyone who followed the skeptic community online watched it happen right in front of their eyes. I watched it happen, but I wasn't too surprised. The church was co-opted in the same way. Feminism, which is to say gynocentrism, is a non-discriminate hijacker of anything remotely organized. At this point in time, choosing between organized religion and organized skepticism represents a distinction without that much of a difference. This brings me back to my own peculiar form of non-theistic Christianity. Once we strip away the dogma and literalism that requires people to suspend critical thinking, what we are left with in the Holy Bible is a grand metaphorical document. It's a set of stories rich in archetypes and narratives as profound and lesson-worthy as any that have been laid out in human history before. I've linked below to a couple of my earlier videos on narrative. Drawing from those, I submit that human consciousness is something guided by story. Our thoughts, beliefs, and actions are dictated by narratives and archetypes, images and impressions of the world we live in drawn from our mythologies. We can no more escape that than we can escape humanity itself. In whatever way we draw on and respond to those time-tested, enduring stories, we subsequently write our own, shaping our beliefs, forming our values, and directing the course of our lives. To that end, in my experience, there is no better story, no better archetype, no better narrative than the life of Jesus Christ as expressed in the Holy Bible. Jesus, as an instructive metaphor, is the biggest red pill ever gifted to humanity. To begin with, the pussification of men would have never happened in a world that practiced Christian values as demonstrated by the story of Christ. The Jesus of the Bible was a radical nonconformist. He defied in totality the corrupt and oppressive authorities of the time, not just the Romans, but their Pharisee puppets as well. His resistance wasn't just political, it was cultural. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a fine example of that. This parable, often touted as an example of doing good for others for its own sake, recounts the story of a man who was robbed, stripped, beaten, and left for dead alongside the road. A Jewish priest and a Levite both passed the man on the road and did nothing to help him. Then came the Samaritan who stopped and rendered the man aid, thus setting an example of humanity worth emulating. What is less often the focus of attention is the fact that at the time, Jews and Samaritans had a bitter hatred of each other. By pointing to the actions of the Samaritan, Jesus wasn't just pointing to morally redeeming actions. He was abrasively shining a light on the bigotry of the times, further provoking sentiments against him from the powers that be. In doing so, he added to his own appeal as a target for their wrath. Confronting popular bigotry. That is about as red pill as it gets. Then there's the narrative of cleansing the temple, where Jesus struck a blow at commercialism. And he didn't settle for boisterous protest. He physically trashed their setups of merchandise and money changing and thrashed them with a whip made of cords till they ran into the streets of Jerusalem, terrified for their lives. It was a massive disruption of the commerce of the times and a clear message about where his priorities resided. Shunning consumerism that corrupts a higher purpose. A red pill dose, if there ever was one. These and other stories in the Bible reveal a saga of a man going his own way. And I don't mean that just as a reference to the fact that he never married. Jesus never wed himself to a number of things, in particular to the hatreds and political corruptions of the times. He stood up fearlessly in opposition to a system of governance so oppressive it makes a Sunday picnic of anything we see today. And he would not back down, wouldn't compromise his beliefs, even for a moment, as they closed in on him for the kill. He called out the hypocrisy he encountered, challenging people to clean up their own messes in life before busying themselves with judging others or telling them how to live. He called for love and inclusion without ever confusing that with weakness or obsequiousness. All while, in 100 different ways, he promoted the importance in believing in something greater than yourself, something red pill men can benefit from considering. With all respect to the Christians I know and those Christians who follow this channel, I think the Jesus of the Bible would shed a tear over what passes for Christian men in the modern church. To be even more frank, I think he would be ashamed of them. One way of describing Christianity I've heard from Christians is that it literally means a follower of Christ, and it reflects people who found their lives on walking in His path, on following in His footsteps. Even as a metaphor, that is a compelling idea. Ultimately, the path of Christ led him to the Via Dolorosa, the long, bloody walk to his crucifixion. Via Dolorosa, by the way, is Latin for painful way, or the way of suffering. It's no wonder why so few Christians actually walk it. And that isn't just a shot at Christians. It's a shot at all of us. We live in a world of cowards that will stand firm and proud on their beliefs till it threatens to make them uncomfortable. This is why the metaphor of Jesus is so important to me. It gives me something to shoot for, something tangible I can hold on to measure myself by in the quest for finding meaning in this life. I say that as a red pill man because in my experience, red pill life is as close as any of us will ever get to that amazing level of living by your convictions in the face of a world that hates you for it. Mind you, I'm assured to meet with some measure of failure. Not one man in a million could do what the Jesus of the Bible did, and the tiny few who did wound up just as dead at the hands of their fellow man. But there's the rub, my friends. We all end up dead. Ultimately, we are all likely to end up forgotten. To steal a quote from one of my favorite artists, Jackson Browne, nothing survives but the way we live our lives. And that is it for today's talk. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.